For 27 years, millions loved Tom Hardy, but every midnight he transformed into someone completely different, until that one photograph changed everything. This story will shock you, because the reality behind one of Hollywood's most intense actors, the secret he hid behind the cameras, was dark enough to destroy his career and life forever. But before we dive into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments, what's the most shocking celebrity secret you've ever heard? Because what you're about to discover about Tom Hardy will change everything you thought you knew about this legendary actor. Living in a secluded estate outside London, Tom Hardy saw two different people every morning when he looked in the mirror. One was the Oscar-nominated actor millions adored, the man who brought Bane, Venom, and Mad Max to life with such raw intensity that audiences couldn't look away. The other was a stranger no one knew, no one could even imagine. His friends described him as a devoted family man. His colleagues praised his professionalism. His fans worshipped his authenticity, but none of them knew the truth. But tonight, everything would change. It was exactly 23 minutes past midnight on a cold November evening in 2023. He sat behind the wheel of his black Range Rover, hands trembling despite years of controlling every muscle for demanding roles. He looked at himself in the rearview mirror, familiar face, the same weathered features that had captivated audiences worldwide, but eyes he'd never recognized. Tonight's the last night, he whispered to himself in that distinctive gravelly voice that had made him famous. I can't take this anymore. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who'd brought some of cinema's most complex and dangerous characters to life was now living a life more dangerous than any of his roles. But this wasn't method acting. This was real. This was destroying him. What he didn't know was that a paparazzi photographer, armed with a telephoto lens and unlimited patience, was following him. And that photograph, the one that would be taken in exactly 47 minutes, would carry the power to destroy his 27-year career overnight. 3 hours earlier, he'd left the premiere of his latest film at Leicester Square. The red carpet had been packed with screaming fans, the usual chaos of flashing cameras and shouted questions. While posing for photographers, signing autographs for fans who'd waited hours in the cold, giving those perfectly crafted answers to reporters who hung on his every word, no one could guess what was running through his mind. When will this fakeness end? He thought, maintaining that trademark intensity even as his soul was screaming. Because that performance, that carefully cultivated image, those carefully measured words that revealed nothing while seeming to reveal everything, it was all an act. In real life, he was hiding something completely different. His co-star had noticed something was off. "You all right, mate?" she'd asked during a quiet moment backstage. "You seem distant." "Just tired," he'd replied, giving her that half smile that had charmed millions. Long day. But it wasn't tiredness. It was the crushing weight of living two completely different lives, and the growing certainty that he couldn't keep both of them going much longer. When he got home to his Hampstead house, the Victorian mansion he'd bought at the height of his fame, the one featured in Architectural Digest, the one that was supposed to represent his success, the first thing he did was rush to his private study. He looked in the antique mirror that had once belonged to a famous Victorian actor and stared at his reflection. But what he really wanted to see wasn't his face. It was whether he could still recognize the man he used to be before this double life began consuming him. The midnight routine had begun. Clothes pulled from a hidden compartment in his walk-in closet, accessories that completely changed his identity, and that terrifying destination that called to him every night like a siren song. The line between his two lives had become so thin that sometimes he forgot which one was real. Mornings would start with his personal trainer at 6 a.m. sharp, the same routine he'd maintained for years. Organic breakfast while posting motivational content on social media, carefully crafted messages about perseverance and authenticity that now felt like mockery. His assistant would brief him on the day's schedule while he sipped his coffee and pretended to be the man the world thought he was. Afternoons were filled with management meetings in glass-walled offices in Soho, discussing new projects, charity work planning, and carefully orchestrated interviews where he'd talk about his normal life. He'd become a master at deflecting personal questions while appearing to be completely open. The thing about acting, he'd tell interviewers, is that you have to find the truth in every character, even the darkest ones. The irony of those words would haunt him later. Evenings were either at industry events, premieres, award shows, charity galas, where he'd network with other celebrities who were probably hiding their own secrets, or spending quality time with his family, playing the role of devoted husband and father, while his mind was already racing ahead to what he'd be doing after midnight. But after midnight, that other life began, the dark world no one knew about. It all started 3 years ago during what the media called his wilderness period. His last film had underperformed dramatically. Critics were calling him outdated, saying he'd lost his edge. Producers weren't returning calls. The man who'd once been considered one of Britain's finest actors was suddenly yesterday's news. The entertainment industry is unforgiving. One day you're on every magazine cover, the next you're a cautionary tale. The phone stops ringing, the invitations dry up, the respect you thought you'd earned evaporates overnight. During those dark nights, battling depression and the crushing fear of irrelevance, he'd accidentally stumbled into the deep corners of the dark web. At first, it was just curiosity, just killing time while wondering if his career was over. But then, he made a terrifying discovery. Underground fighting rings. Not just any fighting. Illegal, extremely high stakes, utterly dangerous bare-knuckle competitions that made his portrayal of Bronson look like child's play. These weren't the sanctioned matches he'd trained for in films. These were real, brutal, and deadly. The first video he watched showed 2 men fighting in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. No rules, no referee, no safety measures, just pure, primal violence. And the money being exchanged, it was staggering. His first bet was £50,000, money he could afford to lose, but it still felt like stepping off a cliff. He lost. The second was £100,000, gone in minutes. But the third time he won, £500,000. And in that moment, watching a man half his age get knocked unconscious by a vicious uppercut, he experienced the most intense adrenaline rush of his life. It was better than any drug, better than any role, better than any standing ovation. It was real in a way that Hollywood never was. But the real problem wasn't the money, because these fighting rings weren't just about gambling. Losers had to pay in other ways. His first assignment came 6 months later. The message was short and direct. You'll pick up a package at the London docks, Pier 47, midnight, no questions asked. The smart thing would have been to walk away. But by then, he was in too deep. The organization behind the fights, he never learned their real name, only that they were connected to some of London's most dangerous criminal families, had made it clear that debts were always collected, one way or another. That night, he used his second identity for the first time. He'd spent hours in makeup rooms preparing for roles, but this transformation was different. This was about survival. He dyed his hair black, wore clothes no one would associate with Tom Hardy, cheap jeans, a hoodie, sneakers that had seen better days. At the address, a man with gold teeth and suspicious eyes handed him a package wrapped in brown paper. "You're new," the man said, studying his face. "You look familiar." "I have one of those faces," Tom replied, keeping his voice steady despite his racing heart. He didn't know what was inside the package, didn't want to know, but he delivered it to the specified address, a luxury apartment in Kensington, where a woman with dead eyes took it without a word. But this was just the beginning. As months passed, the assignments became more complex, sometimes carrying information, USB drives, encrypted phones, documents he was told never to read, sometimes meeting specific people, men in expensive suits who spoke in code, women who looked like they could kill you with their bare hands, sometimes things he never asked about because he'd learned that curiosity could be fatal in this world. The assignments took him to places he'd never seen in his privileged life. Underground clubs where the wealthy came to watch blood sports, private poker games where the stakes weren't just money, but lives, back alley meetings that reminded him of the grittiest scenes from his films, except there were no cameras, no safety coordinators, no one to yell cut if things went wrong. During this process, his day life began to change too. New projects came in, his career resurged mysteriously. Producers who'd been ignoring him suddenly wanted meetings. Scripts that were perfect for him appeared on his agent's desk. Award nominations started coming again. But this wasn't coincidence, because the secret organization he worked for had connections throughout the entertainment industry. Investors in major studios, distributors who could make or break careers, critics who could be influenced. The entertainment industry, he learned, was just another business, and every business had its dark side. "As long as you work for us," the mysterious boss had told him during their only face-to-face meeting, "your career will shine too, but cross us, and you'll discover that we can destroy you just as easily as we built you up." The boss was a woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of refined accent that spoke of expensive education and old money. She looked like she should be running a charity gala, not a criminal organization. But her eyes held a coldness that made his blood freeze. And that's how he began living 2 lives. Day, the perfect actor, model citizen, beloved star, who gave interviews about integrity and authenticity. Night, someone living in shadows, doing dirty work, playing dangerous games in London's criminal underworld. The most frightening part was that this second life excited him more than anything he'd ever experienced. Because in Hollywood's fake world, where everything was scripted and sanitized, he never felt the raw reality he experienced in the underground. When he was carrying a package through dark streets, when he was watching illegal fights, when he was meeting with criminals who could end his life with a word, he felt a alive in a way that no amount of fame or money could provide. His family noticed the change. His wife would comment on his late nights, his mysterious phone calls, his sudden mood swings. "You're different," she'd say. "Distant. Are you having an affair?" If only it were that simple. An affair he could confess to, could ask forgiveness for, could end. But this was something else entirely. Until that night, it was 1:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. He was at the expected location for what should have been a routine assignment, an abandoned warehouse in East London, the kind of place where bodies were found by morning joggers. But this time, something was different. There was a strange tension in the air, a feeling that something was about to go very wrong. When he arrived, there were more people than usual. Men in expensive coats who looked like they'd stepped out of a Guy Ritchie film. Women who watched him with calculating eyes. And in the center of it all, a man he recognized from newspaper photos. A alleged crime boss who'd been in the headlines for months. When he picked up the package, heavier than usual, with an odd metallic scent, the man across from him looked at him with sudden recognition. You're that actor, aren't you?" the man said, his voice carrying a thick East London accent. "The one from the movies? Tom Hardy?" His heart stopped. His carefully constructed mask had slipped. His 27-year career was ending in the eyes of a warehouse worker with a criminal record. "No," he said quickly, but his voice betrayed him. That distinctive tone, the one that had made him famous, was unmistakable. Wrong person. But it was too late, because that man had his phone out and he was taking pictures. And those pictures carried the power to tear down the wall between his two lives. Driving home through the empty London streets, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the steering wheel. This isn't over, he thought, checking his rearview mirror obsessively. It'll never be over. Because now he only had two choices. Either confess the truth and end his career, or live forever under the control of this secret organization. Always one photograph away from total destruction. But what he didn't know was that the warehouse worker was just the beginning. Because that night, other eyes were watching him too. Professional eyes. Paparazzi who'd been following him for weeks, sensing that something was off about his midnight disappearances. The next morning, he woke up to his phone buzzing incessantly. 57 missed calls. His manager was in panic mode. His publicist was screaming, and his agent was already talking about damage control. "There are some photographs," his manager's voice was shaking. "Tom, please tell me you can explain these." His heart sank. When he opened the photos sent to his phone, the scene turned his nightmare into reality. Clear, high-definition pictures of him that night, at that warehouse, surrounded by known criminals, holding what was obviously an illegal package. The photos were everywhere within hours. Twitter, Instagram, every tabloid website. Tom Hardy scandal was trending worldwide. The headlines were brutal. Tom Hardy's secret criminal life exposed. Hollywood's Dark Knight, the real Tom Hardy. From Mad Max to criminal, Hardy's double life. But the most terrifying call came from an unknown number. The voice was distorted, clearly using a voice changer. "If you say one word about our organization, it won't just be your career that ends. Your family won't be safe. Do you understand?" That night, sitting alone in his study, surrounded by awards and accolades that now felt meaningless, he made the hardest decision of his life. The next day, against all advice from his legal team, his management, and his family, he called a press conference. The media frenzy was unprecedented. Every major network, every entertainment journalist, every blogger with a camera was there. "It's time to tell the truth," he said into the microphone, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "For 3 years, I've been living a lie, but today, I'm going to tell you everything." And he did. The gambling, the underground fighting rings, the illegal organization, his assignments, his double life, everything. The room was dead silent. Cameras were rolling. The world was listening to one of their most beloved actors confess to being a criminal. "I know my career ends here," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "but I couldn't live with this lie anymore. I chose this path when I was desperate and afraid, and I've been trapped in it ever since." 6 months later, he moved to a small cottage in the countryside. He wasn't famous anymore, but he was real, he was free, and most importantly, he was alive. Tom Hardy's story reminds us that authenticity, no matter how painful, is worth more than any performance. Sometimes the greatest role you can play is yourself. That's the end. If this story shocked you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more incredible celebrity stories you won't believe. But freedom, as Tom would discover, isn't a final destination. It's a daily battle. Even in that quiet cottage tucked away in the English countryside, the echoes of his past life followed him. Some nights, he still woke in a cold sweat, convinced someone was watching from the woods. Other times, he'd see a tabloid headline or an old film of his airing on television and feel a wave of memories, equal parts pride and shame, wash over him. He began writing, not scripts or memoirs, but letters, to people he'd wronged, to his wife and son, to the actor he used to be. Most of them he never sent, but writing became a new kind of therapy, one that didn't require cameras or applause, just brutal honesty and ink-stained hands. Once a week, he'd visit a local youth center, volunteering under a different name. The kids had no idea they were talking to a former Hollywood superstar. He didn't want them to. What he wanted was to help others who, like him, stood on the edge of a bad choice. One rainy afternoon, as he watched a group of teens spar in a boxing ring, he realized something. His fame had been a mask, his fortune a trap. But here, here, in this moment, mud on his boots, coffee gone cold, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Tom Hardy's story may have ended in the spotlight, but his real life finally began in the shadows. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more true tales that will leave you speechless.